Have you ever wondered why some people leave a much deeper impact on an avoidant than physical attraction ever could? While lust may catch an avoidant's attention, it rarely reaches the parts of them that truly influence attachment and connection. Avoidants are often driven by hidden psychological needs that many people overlook. In this video, we'll explore 5 powerful psychological turn-ons that create a lasting emotional pull, helping you understand what genuinely attracts an avoidant on a deeper level, and why these factors often matter far more than simple chemistry. One of the strongest psychological turn-ons for an avoidant is feeling emotionally safe without pressure. This may sound simple, but for someone with avoidant attachment patterns, it can be far more powerful than physical attraction alone. Many avoidants have learned, consciously or unconsciously, to associate closeness with expectations, demands, or the risk of losing their independence. As a result, when they meet someone who creates a sense of emotional safety rather than emotional pressure, they often feel a level of comfort that catches them by surprise. Most people try to build connection by increasing emotional intensity. They want more conversations, more reassurance, more time together, and more discussions about feelings. While these actions may work for some individuals, avoidants can experience them as overwhelming when they happen too quickly. The more they feel pushed, the stronger their instinct becomes to pull away and protect their personal space. This is not necessarily because they do not care. Often, it is because their nervous system interprets pressure as a threat to their autonomy. Emotional safety, however, creates a completely different experience. It comes from knowing that someone is not trying to force intimacy, demand constant communication, or rush the relationship into a level of closeness they are not ready for. When an avoidant feels that they have room to breathe, they become more likely to lower their guard naturally. Instead of feeling trapped, they feel respected. Instead of preparing for conflict, they begin to relax. What makes this especially attractive is that it allows avoidants to engage on their own terms. They do not feel judged for needing space. They do not feel criticized for being slower to open up. They sense that the other person is emotionally secure enough to handle temporary distance without turning it into drama or guilt. This creates trust. And trust is one of the rarest and most valuable experiences for many avoidants. Ironically, when pressure disappears, avoidants often become more curious and emotionally invested. They start reaching out more, sharing more about themselves, and spending more time with the person who makes them feel safe. The connection begins to feel like a choice rather than an obligation. That feeling of freedom, combined with emotional acceptance, can become incredibly magnetic. While lust may create temporary excitement, emotional safety creates a deeper attraction that stays with them long after the initial spark fades. For many avoidants, feeling safe enough to be themselves is one of the most powerful turn-ons they can experience. Another psychological turn-on that affects avoidants deeply is being understood without having to explain everything. For many avoidants, one of the most exhausting parts of relationships is the feeling that they must constantly justify their behavior, emotions, or need for space. They often struggle to put their inner world into words, not because they have no feelings, but because expressing those feelings can feel uncomfortable, vulnerable, or even unsafe. When someone seems to understand them naturally, it creates a sense of relief that is incredibly attractive. Many avoidants spend a large part of their lives feeling misunderstood. People may label them as cold, distant, uncaring, or emotionally unavailable. Over time, they become accustomed to being judged based on their actions, rather than understood based on their intentions. As a result, they often expect others to misinterpret them. When a person comes along who sees beyond the surface and recognizes what is really happening, it immediately stands out. For example, instead of assuming that an avoidant's need for space means they have lost interest, an understanding person recognizes that space is often how they regulate emotions and maintain a sense of balance. Instead of demanding explanations for every period of withdrawal, they remain calm and secure. This kind of awareness makes the avoidant feel seen in a way they rarely experience. What makes this so powerful is that it removes a major source of emotional pressure. Avoidants often dislike feeling interrogated about their feelings or forced to explain every action. The more they feel analyzed or questioned, the more likely they are to retreat. However, when someone intuitively understands their behavior without making them defend themselves, it creates a feeling of acceptance and comfort. This does not mean mind reading or tolerating unhealthy behavior. Rather, it means having enough emotional intelligence to recognize patterns without immediately jumping to negative conclusions. Avoidants are often drawn to people who can remain calm, patient, and observant instead of reactive. Such individuals make relationships feel easier and less emotionally draining. Over time, this understanding becomes a source of attraction that goes much deeper than physical chemistry. The avoidant begins to feel emotionally secure around that person. They realize they do not have to constantly manage someone else's reactions or explain themselves at every turn. As trust develops, they often become more willing to communicate openly because they no longer fear being misunderstood. For an avoidant, finding someone who truly gets them without endless explanations can feel rare. It creates a powerful emotional connection, one built not on pressure or demands, but on genuine understanding. And for many avoidants, that feeling can be far more compelling than lust alone. Confidence that doesn't chase them is one of the most powerful psychological turn-ons for an avoidant, because it directly challenges what they are used to in relationships. Avoidants are often approached by people who become quickly attached, overly available, or emotionally dependent. At first, this attention may feel flattering, but over time, it tends to create pressure. When someone starts chasing them, constantly seeking validation or reassurance, the avoidant begins to feel a subtle loss of space and control. That is usually when their withdrawal instinct activates. What creates a completely different reaction is confidence that is steady, self-contained, and not dependent on the avoidant's response. This kind of person is not trying to win approval, prove worth, or force closeness. Instead, they carry a sense of inner stability. They can like the avoidant without needing to constantly pursue them. They can enjoy their presence without becoming emotionally reactive if the avoidant pulls back. This emotional independence is deeply noticeable to an avoidant because it feels rare and refreshing. On a psychological level, avoidants are often more drawn to what feels emotionally balanced and non-demanding. When someone is not chasing them, the avoidant does not feel trapped or pressured. Instead, they are given space to experience attraction at their own pace. This lack of pressure paradoxically increases interest because it removes the usual emotional resistance they associate with relationships. The connection feels lighter, safer, and more optional, which is exactly the kind of environment where avoidants begin to open up. Another important factor is respect. When someone is confident enough not to chase, it sends an unspoken message. I value myself, and I am not going to lose my identity in this connection. Avoidants are often subconsciously attracted to this because they fear engulfment. They want closeness, but only when it does not threaten their independence. A person who is not chasing them signals that closeness will not come with emotional pressure or loss of freedom. This kind of confidence also creates curiosity. When someone is not constantly available or emotionally pushing for attention, the avoidant starts to wonder about them. Instead of feeling pursued, they begin to observe. Instead of withdrawing from pressure, they move closer out of interest. The dynamic shifts from avoidance to exploration. Over time, this steady confidence builds a quiet form of attraction that is much deeper than surface-level chemistry. The avoidant begins to associate that person with emotional safety, independence, and stability. And unlike intense pursuit, which often triggers resistance, this calm confidence allows attachment to grow naturally. Respect for their autonomy is one of the most powerful psychological turn-ons for an avoidant because it directly speaks to their deepest emotional need. the ability to stay connected without feeling controlled, pressured, or engulfed. Avoidants are not necessarily afraid of love itself. What they often struggle with is the loss of personal space and identity that they associate with intense emotional closeness. When someone respects their autonomy, it creates a relationship dynamic that feels safe enough for them to engage without triggering their natural withdrawal response. In many relationships, people unconsciously try to increase closeness by increasing control, even in subtle ways. This can look like constant texting, expecting immediate replies, questioning time spent alone, or interpreting independence as rejection. For an avoidant, even small signs of pressure can feel emotionally suffocating. Their instinct is not to punish or reject the other person, but to step back in order to regain internal balance. The more their autonomy feels threatened, the more they emotionally distance themselves. However, when someone consistently respects their need for space, individuality, and independence, the emotional experience changes completely. Instead of feeling watched or monitored, the avoidant feels trusted. Instead of feeling obligated to meet emotional expectations in real time, they feel free to engage when they are genuinely ready. This freedom is not taken lightly by avoidants, because it is rare for them to experience relationships without some form of emotional pressure. Respecting autonomy does not mean being distant or detached. It means understanding that closeness does not require constant access or control. It means allowing the avoidant to have a separate identity, personal time, and emotional breathing room without turning it into a problem. When a person can maintain their own life and also respect the avoidant's independence, it creates a balanced dynamic that feels sustainable rather than overwhelming. Psychologically, this respect builds trust faster than emotional intensity ever could. Avoidants are far more likely to open up when they know their boundaries will not be challenged or punished. They begin to associate the relationship with safety rather than pressure. Over time, this sense of freedom actually draws them closer instead of pushing them away. What makes this especially powerful is that it removes the fear of losing oneself in the relationship. Avoidants often carry an unconscious belief that intimacy leads to dependency or emotional loss of control. When someone consistently respects their autonomy, that fear weakens. They begin to realize they can stay connected without sacrificing who they are. In this way, respect becomes more than just politeness. It becomes emotional security. And for an avoidant, feeling free while being connected is one of the rarest and most attractive emotional experiences they can have. Emotional consistency and predictability are deeply attractive to avoidants because they create a sense of stability in a world that often feels emotionally unpredictable to them. Many avoidants have experienced relationships or early environments where emotions were intense, inconsistent, or difficult to manage. As a result, they often develop a heightened sensitivity to emotional chaos, sudden mood shifts, or unpredictable reactions from others. When someone displays steady emotional behavior, it quietly signals safety to their nervous system. In most relationships, emotional intensity is often mistaken for passion. People may show strong highs and lows, frequent arguments followed by reconciliation, or sudden shifts between closeness and distance. While some individuals find this exciting, avoidants typically experience it as draining or overwhelming. Their internal system becomes alert when they cannot predict how the other person will react. This unpredictability makes them more likely to withdraw in order to regain emotional control. In contrast, emotional consistency creates a completely different experience. When a person remains calm, stable, and grounded, even during minor misunderstandings or moments of distance, the avoidant begins to relax. They no longer feel like they are walking through emotional uncertainty. Instead, they start to trust that the emotional environment will remain steady, even when they need space or time alone. Predictability is especially powerful because it removes the fear of emotional punishment. Avoidants often worry, sometimes unconsciously, that expressing themselves or taking space will lead to conflict, guilt, or emotional withdrawal from the other person. But when someone responds in a balanced and consistent way, that fear begins to fade. They learn that distance does not create drama, and communication does not lead to emotional overwhelm. Over time, this consistency builds trust in a quiet but powerful way. The avoidant starts to associate the person with emotional safety rather than emotional volatility. They do not have to constantly anticipate emotional reactions or manage tension. This allows them to engage more naturally without feeling pressured or guarded. Another important aspect is that emotional consistency gives avoidants space to approach intimacy at their own pace. Instead of being pulled into emotional extremes, they are able to observe, process, and respond without urgency. This slower rhythm feels much more comfortable for them because it aligns with how they naturally regulate closeness. What makes this turn-on so significant is that it does not rely on excitement or intensity. Instead, it is built on calm reliability. The avoidant begins to realize that they are not in an emotionally unsafe environment, and that realization slowly lowers their defenses. Over time, consistency becomes more attractive than unpredictability, and stability becomes more desirable than intensity. In this way, emotional predictability transforms from something simple into something deeply magnetic for an avoidant partner. Genuine acceptance, instead of attempts to change them, is one of the deepest psychological turn-ons for an avoidant because it directly touches their core fear of being judged, controlled, or reshaped in a relationship. Many avoidants carry a quiet expectation that if someone gets close enough, they will eventually try to fix them. This can come in the form of pushing them to be more expressive, more available, more emotionally open, or more consistent than they naturally feel comfortable being. Even when these intentions come from care, avoidants often experience them as pressure to become someone they are not. Because of this, avoidants tend to be highly sensitive to subtle signals that someone is trying to change them. It might show up in repeated questions about their emotional habits, criticism of their need for space, or disappointment when they don't respond in expected ways. Over time, this can make them feel like they are being evaluated instead of accepted. And when someone feels evaluated, they rarely feel safe enough to fully open up. Genuine acceptance creates a completely different emotional environment. It does not mean approving of unhealthy behavior or ignoring boundaries. Instead, it means recognizing the person as they are right now, without constantly trying to reshape them into an ideal version. When an avoidant feels that someone is not trying to fix them, they begin to relax internally. The pressure to perform emotionally disappears, and in its place comes a sense of being seen without judgment. This kind of acceptance is powerful because it reduces the avoidant's internal resistance. Instead of preparing to defend themselves or withdraw, they begin to stay present. They do not feel like they need to justify their natural tendencies or constantly explain their emotional pace. This creates a rare feeling of emotional freedom within the relationship. Over time, genuine acceptance builds trust in a way that pressure never can. The avoidant starts to understand that they are not being measured against expectations they cannot consistently meet. They are not being compared to emotional standards that feel unnatural to them. Instead, they are valued as a whole person, including their need for space, independence, and slower emotional processing. What makes this so attractive is that it removes the fear of rejection based on authenticity. Avoidants often hold back parts of themselves because they worry those parts will not be accepted. But when someone consistently responds with understanding rather than correction, they begin to reveal more of their true self naturally. Eventually, this acceptance becomes emotionally magnetic. The avoidant starts to associate the person with safety, freedom, and emotional honesty. And in that environment, they are far more likely to develop genuine attachment, not because they were pressured into change, but because they were finally allowed to be themselves without fear of judgment or rejection.